Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. By the end of this video, there will be more questions outstanding than answers given. Probably because it's a subject I don't know everything about. And if you're not interested in things like nutrients and stuff like that, then bail out now, because that's what this one's about. This is really following on from my one of the problem Dendrobiums, which was the black antelope type, which has got this problem with the paling from the base of the leaves and the patterning on the leaves. And my furtive mind's been a bit active since those two videos were produced, and I thought, well, let's have a look round and see if other orchids have got similar signs. And the answer is yes and no. Some have. So it's not unique to that orchid, and I think I can reasonably safely say that the ones that are showing those signs are the more vigorous growers. That might just be coincidence. That's the trouble. When you've got a large collection and not everything is perfect, and it probably never can be, you know, you look at your problem orchids and try and find solutions. But this streaking and patterning, at the moment I have no answer. But I mean, I can pick on. There's a leaf. That's got streaks. What is that? That's I think that's an Oncostelli, Peter Comp. No, it's not a Miltonidium. It's got Oncidium in it anyway. You could say that this one, it's got the dark spots on Oncidium types is in fact a bacterial infection. They are prone to it, and some get it bad, some never get it, but the leaves aren't bright green all over. So I can safely say there are a few suffering from this trait, some more than others. As I said, this one was quite a bad one, that particular Dendrobium. But looking round, there are some others. So it's not just that one. So I'm just trying to find one. My Lodigesiai's got yellowing leaves, but that's on the older canes. They're probably going to drop. So you can't get things confused with the natural dying off of leaves on older growths. That, you know, a lot of orchids do get that problem. But then if you look at this bulbophyllum, that's pushed out stacks of new growths, and I've got one leaf that's got a little bit of purple on it. Otherwise the leaves are coming out good. But that's a relatively slow grower. You could look at this Dendrobium. Hang on, I'll have to get it viewed from the top. It's got yellow spots on the leaves. Well, I can disregard that one because I know what those yellow spots are. That was scale got at the new growths, and the marks never go away, so you can put that one to one side. But when you get something that seems to be happening that perhaps didn't happen before, now it might be because you didn't notice it or it wasn't brought to your attention, but nonetheless you look at what's changed. Now, I started using VMSU Fertilizer at the beginning of last year, about February last year, I think, and with great success. But I mean, if you look at the analysis, there shouldn't be any need to mess about. I mean, it's got a reasonable amount of nitrogen. That's not a high nitrogen concentration, looking at the other values. I mean, the NPK are the three biggies. And with the work that was done at the university, it was realised that the amount of phosphorus that orchids use is not as high as was once thought. You know, a lot of fertilisers have got an NPK of the same value, like 20, 20, 20. Most of those are designed for plants out in the garden and stuff like that, you know. So this was done for orchids, and in there is 8% of calcium and 2% of magnesium. Yeah, it's got all the trace elements, including, you know, an amount of iron. what we often tend to forget is that that's the big print. Underneath is the small print, which are the elements that have been used, the chemicals that have been used to make that fertilizer. And they can differ, you know, they can differ. I mean, I was a little worried that this fertilizer has no sulfur mentioned, and you need some of that. But it's in there. The sulfur is in amongst the chemicals that have been used to produce those named elements. So it is in there, but because it's not added as a separate entity, it's not listed. So I de-worried myself. But what's changed this year? That's changed this year. I've been adding that frequently. In fact, I add an amount, relatively small, to most waterings when I'm feeding, and occasionally I use that on its own. Now, what's the difference? I mean, that's calcium, magnesium and iron. Well, therein lies a potential problem, because according to the king of nutrients, who I firmly go to when I got this sort of related problem, you can't give a plant too much calcium. It'll only use what it needs. So effectively it's, I would suggest, almost impossible to overdose. What about the other two? The calcium that I'm adding has also got magnesium and iron, and they're chelated. So you can virtually guarantee that over a reasonable pH range, not being silly, that iron is getting in there. There's iron in there as well. It's called a micro element. There's not supposed to be much of it. And having done a bit of reading, magnesium, although absolutely necessary, can be overdosed. And it will have an effect on some of the other elements and whether or not the plant can use them. So that's the thing that's changed. Now, I don't know enough about nutrients to start mucking about adding calcium on its own, because I'd have to go and buy that separately, and I wouldn't know what to buy or how much, or, you know, quite honestly, I should have been just happy with that and perhaps not mucked about so much. But that's a change. That didn't exist. Now it does. So point number one. Point number two, I mix up a stock solution, very strong, and then I add it to my water and use my TDS meter to measure the result, because it's only the result that the plants are going to get. Plants are never going to get near that stuff. And having chatted, my MSU fertilizer came from first Ray. So when I first got it, I had quite a lot of email chat with Ray himself about its use and whether or not I could mix up a stock solution. And he said it lasts pretty well mixed up as a stock solution as long as you keep it cool and dark. So what else has changed this year then? Where the hell is the cool? Yeah? And strictly speaking, that container's not dark, is it? Yeah? So that stock solution's had heat applied to it. Most fertilizers that are in a powder form, don't get me wrong, liquid fertilizers don't really change their makeup if kept in their container, sealed tight and everything. But nonetheless, as a liquid fertilizer, it's probably got a shelf life. I don't know. That's just an assumption. But most of the fertilizer manufacturers recommend that you always mix up fresh. Yeah? And any leftover you discard. Well, that could be genuine, or it could be that they want you to use it up faster and buy some more. Yeah? Food for thought. You don't go into a business, well, you go into a business to make profits, and you make profits by selling stuff. So the more you sell, the more you make. So that's food for thought. But I haven't been able to store that cool. Okay, it lives in a cupboard, which is dark. But it's also quite a large quantity, so it actually lasts quite a while. And doing a bit of reading, once a fertilizer that's in a powder or any dry form is actually mixed up with its water, in this case RO water, after time, chemical reactions can take place within the mix, and things start bonding together and forming new things. that weren't in the original fertilizer. And some of those things may not be desirable and may actually remove some of the good stuff. Yeah? So some stuff may become unavailable to your plants because of the chemical reaction in the mix. So de-risking things, we're not at the end of the growing season yet. I haven't got calcium on its own, but I'm going to look into that. So the only additional calcium I can add to my plants puts in magnesium and iron as well. And iron is a micro element that's already in my VMSU fertilizer. Yeah? So by varying my pH, that iron should be available to my plants. And I'm now adding an amount on top of it. Yeah? So there could be too much iron getting into the plants now. There could be too much magnesium getting into the plants now. I mean, this should be okay on its own. It shouldn't need any extra stuff. And then you add in the fact that some orchids grow like mad and some are so slow you've got a job to see them moving. I mean, here's a slow one, this little Orangus. You know, that's putting up its second new leaf this year. Yeah? It's put out quite a few new roots, lots of growing tips, and the side plant is progressing. It's pushed out a little plantlet at the side. On Orangus, that's not strictly speaking a kiki. That is their way of growing. Plantlets, I call them. But it's a very, very slow grower. Yeah? So how much feed's that going to need then? Not a lot. It's not going to use it, is it? Whereas you get something like the Lodigessii in the Dendrobium world. You know, most of these are new canes this year, and they're pushing on at great knots. So that would use more feed. That would use next to nothing. This one's putting out some nice new growths. That'll be using a bit more than that one, but perhaps not as much as that. See what I mean? So many variables. And when you get into the Cattleyas. Now, an individual growth on a Cattleya can grow like, you know, like mad. But as a plant, most of the time they would be classed as relatively slow growers because they don't put up dozens of new canes at the same time unless you've got a real giant specimen plant type thing. Most of us probably haven't got to that stage yet. We haven't had our plants long enough. But in my Cattleya range, if you look at my Brassolalia Macae, that's putting on a lot of new growths all at once. It's a large plant already. Very pleased with that as well. I'm not going to get plants down, but I mean, if you look at this Dendrobium here, number of new growths and rate of growth is colossal. Again, the one next to it, rate of growth, colossal. And some of the longer cane Dendrobiums, I mean, that cane there is this year's growth. Those two at the back there, this year's growth, and this one, this year's growth. That's a lot of growth for an orchid in a single season. And the one that is going mad, that there isn't a problem with, is up near the glass. That's about 30 new growths on that thing. And they're all pushing on at a rate of knots. If you remember at the beginning of the season, I was really pleased to see a couple of new growths pushing out. Well, it's now a bush. It's growing like mad. So different rates of growth would need different level of feed. Do they get it in here? No. When I water, stuff gets the same. Now, mounts are different to pots. Get watered at different frequencies and sometimes different amounts. So the thing that's changed is, first of all, my stock solution hasn't been kept cool. That means it could be changing its properties. So solution to that, don't mix up anywhere near as much. So I'm going to discard this whatever that is. It's a 4-pint container, I think. I'm going to discard that and get a much smaller container that's black. I've got a very suitable one stored in the cupboard that some hydrogen peroxide came in. I think it's half a litre. So by mixing it up in there, it'll have far less air contact. It's black, so no light gets in, and in theory it should keep a bit longer, and because there's far less of it, it won't last as long. So I mean, I don't think last time I mixed up some new in there was over a month ago, and I mixed up a smaller amount, so more air contact for a start. And we have heat, we've had heat. So all that is food for thought. That answers no questions. It poses more questions than others. But given a balanced feed specifically designed for orchids and specifically designed for RO or rainwater, should I be mucking about adding stuff in? Generally speaking, I've got slow growers, I've got some that show virtually no growth at all, or very little, and some that grow like mad. So in theory they need different amounts of feed at different frequencies. But I can't do that. I can't go round thinking, right, you need that level of feed, but you don't. You do, you need a bit in the middle. You probably don't need much at all. I'd be here all day. I can't cope with that with the number of plants. If I had 6 plants, they could individually be fed and have their own frequency each. I can't do that. So, changes. First of all, I'm going to stop mixing that with that, because that's a change for this year that didn't happen before. That way, the balanced formula with its calcium and magnesium and its iron should be available to the plants, along with everything else. What I will do is stop mixing up so much stock solution so that I use it quicker. This problem's going to go away once we get to the autumn, because the amount of feed and the frequency goes right down. Yeah. And if I use this, I think I should use it separately. I got fed up with, especially with the pots that only, well, under normal circumstances, not with the heat wave, but under normal circumstances, they're getting watered every sort of 4, 5, 6 days. And if you start including a feed of that on its own and a flush, they're not actually getting fed that often. That's why I started mixing the two, so that they get this extra stuff every time. But as I said, it's not calcium on its own. It has got magnesium in it, which can be overdosed. And it's also got iron in it, which is supposed to be a micro element, and it's already got some in here. So there's a possibility there's a bit too much of that going in there. You certainly can't say it's short of it. Yeah? So, a few changes. First of all, mix up less stock solution, put it in a black container, and hopefully now the heat's gone, it should be able to be stored a lot cooler. I'm going to have a think, is there another place in the house? Because at the moment it's stored in a cupboard in the kitchen. Well, that's not the coolest place in the house, but it is in a cupboard where it's dark. Well, if it goes in a black container, I don't need to worry about it going in a cupboard. So perhaps keeping it in the hallway, which is always a cool room. It virtually gets no sun in the front of the house window. It's always cool in there, so that would lower the temperature. And by putting it in a black container, I don't have to worry about keeping it in a cupboard. So that would be a small change to do, and keeping that separate, I think. As I said, when you see problems, you look for what's changed, and what's changed is that, yeah, the temperature that's kept at, but that hasn't changed. And last year, that on its own worked fine, and mixing it up as a stock solution appeared to be working fine, but didn't have the heat last year. So, a few changes. They're no big deal for me to do, and the trouble is with any of this sort of thing, noticing whether it's working or not just takes time. And I mean, it's not going to be too long before the plants are going to start slowing up anyway, because although we still believe we're in summer, the day lengths are shortening quite dramatically already, and it won't be too long before the day and the night's the same length, and then the day lengths start getting shorter. So there's not too much longer to be worrying about high levels of feed and pushing on as maximum growth and everything, and taking advantage of the longer days, which is what I do. One good bit of news, my other Miltonia that was badly infected with Fusarium has got a little spike on it. It's not a strong spike, but so both of these two that were badly infected, And just looking at those leaves, they've got those marks. They're not a consistent green, and they flipping well should be. Now they're getting high light levels, which may have an effect, but it shouldn't really be a patchy effect. Light tends to affect the whole leaf. The whole leaves, they all go pale. Now this streaking and yellow marks on the leaves is not throughout the collection. Now I've excluded viruses, but then it could be. And if I've had biting bugs in here, it will spread from plant to plant as the bugs move from plant to plant. Most of the bugs tend to stay put, quite honestly. They find something they like to eat and stay there. But there's a possibility, a possibility. Something else that's doing really well up the back there, I've just noticed. My prima donna that got split, the new growths on that are pushing out nicely. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new growths on there. So that will get back towards the large specimen plant I had before it was split. 5 new canes is quite a bit in one season. And some of them are still relatively young. Because of its disturbance, the new growths came out late. So I won't get as many blooms next year, but what I'm after is another strong, healthy plant like I had before, which is coming on nicely. Other things growing like mad. This chrysotoxin that I got, when did I get that? Beginning of this year. That was split and repotted. And the new canes on here, is that one there. But the other two are heading off into space. I'm going to have to start strapping these two in to keep them upright. They're pushing on at a rate of knots. So, new canes, potential for more blooms. There's still potential on this Dendrobium to bloom from the existing canes. So if I can get this to bloom, it should perform pretty well. Late winter, early spring, I believe. Something like that. So yeah, lots of questions and no definitive answers. But if a problem seems to be appearing across some plants that wasn't there before, you look for what's changed. Yeah? So as I said, lots of unanswered questions in there, but yeah, a few tweaks and see if we can improve things. I'm not sure that, like in this is, this, I'm not sure I can ever stop the progress of whatever's caused this. That may not be possible. There are some of the elements we use are directly connected with photosynthesis and the production of chlorophyll, which gives leaves its green colour, their green colour. Yeah? So if there's problems within the nutrients and the plant's ability to take them up, and you affect chlorophyll production, you'd affect the colour of the leaves. Get it wrong in one direction, they'll go really dark. Yeah? Too much chlorophyll. Not enough? Well, they're obviously going to be paler, aren't they? Yeah. So maybe I've got an imbalance due to what I'm using and how I'm using it. So, a few tweaks, and we'll see how we go from there. If I have got one of the viruses, and there are many, you've got the ring spot virus that tends to hit oncidium types. You've got the Cymbidium mosaic virus. Well, that's all in the name. It hits cymbidiums hard and fast, but it can still be got in other plants. And something else I was reminded of by one of the good growers as I was helping him stake one of his own cymbidiums, he demanded I go away and sterilise my hands. And I'm inquisitive. I said, why? He said, because you smoke. Yeah? And the tobacco mosaic virus lives on through the processing of tobacco, and you roll your own little ciggies. So you've got the potential to spread that virus with your hands. So go away and dunk them in the sterilising stuff. Well, mind you, he's obsessive with his sterilisation process. He'd sterilise the world if he could, I think. But it's good to keep stuff clean, as we know. Sterilising tools, clean pots, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I'm not knocking that, don't get me wrong. But yeah, so I mean, it could be that I've introduced something because I smoke. There is a possibility. You can't prove these things. All you can do is put the theories out there, look at the possibilities, you know, and the percentage of that possibility, and think, well, that is possible, or oh, that's so unlikely, we can disregard that. But you have to weigh your own, you know, weigh your own mind up, think it through yourself, your own situations. But yeah, this yellow marking and potential streaking and discoloration on leaves, as soon as you start looking it up, you will get so many things it could be that you end up getting fed up looking it up, because you think, oh right, I found it, it could be that. Oh, hang on, it could be that. Ooh, it could be that. It could be both. It could be all three. It just gets to the point where you think, I'm not going to get a definitive answer. So all you can do is weigh them all up together and, in my case, think, what have I changed? What have I done that's different this year that wasn't there last year? And I think I've found a possible solution. I can't guarantee it. But there we go. So, yeah, food for thought. I mean, looking round, there are some plants that seem to be immune to this discoloration on the leaves, but maybe they manifest it in different forms. You know, maybe their roots aren't growing as well as they could be. It's difficult to say. So, as I said, more questions than answers, but you throw the questions out. I don't expect loads of answers to come back in, but these are food for thought, things to have a think about. Nutrients is an incredibly complex subject, and once you start talking about these elements bonding together and making chemical changes into other substances, I get a headache just thinking about looking at it, let alone actually looking at it and trying to understand it. So I like to keep things relatively simple in my mind. And the simplest form of feeding my orchids is to use the VMSU fertilizer with the RO water. You've still got to debate how much, you know, how strong, how often, how many times should you flush. You know, it just goes on. An endless subject. And it is endless. There is no end to it. But if whatever you're doing seems to be working great, my suggestion is don't fix it if it's not broke. If stuff's working okay, leave it be. And maybe I should have left it be, because things did work well last year. And a marked improvement from previous years, noticeable. And I was well pleased. But you get a bit more information, a bit more knowledge, and you think, right, I'll make some changes. I'm not sure my changes have done any good or any harm. But, you know, there are some plants not doing as well as they did. So you stop and look at, you know, what's changed then. I mean, here's another one. This Phalaenopsis. Okay, the bottom two leaves could be classed as older leaves, but they're not that old. And now that one's going. That's not an old leaf. That top leaf's not looking good. The last leaf it grew is tiny. It is actually grown a new plant now. Yeah? So it's not right. There's another one over here. Another one of the mounted Phalaenopsis. Yeah? Now the oldest leaf on that one doesn't look too bad. It's the newer ones. Well, it is said that if your new growth suffers, yeah, it's the non-mobile nutrients. Sorry, if the new growth suffers, it's your mobile unit. Oh, hang on. More coffee. Yes, your older growths will suffer with the mobile nutrients because the plant will move them to the growth areas where it needs them most, leaving the older parts of the plant depleted. Yeah. The non-mobile nutrients will normally make the new growth suffer if there's not enough of them. But there'd have to be a real shortage, I think. Anyway, so it's not unique to a specific genus or type of orchid. It's affecting multiple types of orchids, but only some of them. And it does appear to be the ones that either need higher levels of feed or are growing fastest. So, I don't know. Anyway, the next time my pots get watered, they're all getting a good flush. Like a restart, if you see what I mean. I mean a real good flush this time too. And that will clear out the pots, in effect. Now, from that point on, I haven't quite made my mind up what I'm going to do. But I know if I use the CalMag on its own, then that calcium, that magnesium and that iron will successfully get into the plant in a usable form. Yeah? But I've still got to weigh up in my mind, do they need that separate feed? Or should I just use the VMSU fertilizer that's got all of that in an available form, providing it's got a suitable pH? Should I stop playing around? I haven't got an answer to that yet because I'm still thinking on it and I haven't made my mind up. But as I said at the start, food for thought. Now, if you haven't got a headache, I have. See you next time. Bye for now.